Welcome to Law Subscribed. This is your dedicated news source for all things subscriptions in the law. My name is Matthew Kurbis. I'm the subscription attorney, and I believe subscriptions can help bridge the access to justice gap and incentivize attorneys to modernize and scale their practice like never before. On this show, I interview lawyers ditching the billable hour and experts who can help attorneys move beyond billing time. Thanks to my sponsors, 650 and Gavel. Links to both in the show notes. More on them later, and use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED when signing up. You get 10% off, and it supports the show. The best way to support the show is to share it with someone you know. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. Without further delay, here's the episode. Korin Munsterman, I'm so pleased to have you on the Law Subscribe podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I heard you through a Legal Talk Network podcast, which you gave to the Bar Association, and heard what you're doing about teaching Gen AI, and that was a while ago. And so actually, I'm really excited to have you here today so we could talk about Gen AI, teaching it to the future of lawyers, what that means for the profession, and really what that's like. But before we even get into that, how about, in case my listeners haven't come across that Legal Talk Network episode or your work before, just give us a little background on what got you to where you are today.
Okay, so thank you again. I started a long time ago. Before I went to law school, I was working in law firms. And then a law librarian, very wise man, told me that, if you want to go to law school, become a law librarian and then work in law schools, and then you can get your law degree for free. So that was the approach that I took, and it worked out really well. And then I just loved academia. So I've stayed in academia all this time. So I've worked in all kinds of law schools, from, aspiring law schools that haven't yet received ABA accreditation, all the way up to like Harvard Law School, and everything in between. Mostly private schools. This is the first UNT Dallas School of Law is the first public law school I've ever worked for. It's a little different the way that things manage, but when it comes to teaching, it's all the same. And so I have been teaching law students for years on how to use technology. So when I was at Harvard, for instance, I was the director of clinical technology. So I taught all the students at all the different clinics. And at the time, there were 9 of them from the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau. And at the time, it was called the Hale and Dorr Legal Services Clinic. And then the smaller clinics like the Mediation Clinic and the Housing Clinic and those types of clinics, how to use technology to become more efficient, but also to introduce them to the technologies that they were likely to run into in practice. So when I started working at UNT Dallas, that was one of the classes that I had to teach, that we are the only law school in the country, and this was not my doing, it was my predecessor's doing, along with the originating faculty, to have a legal technology proficiency requirement for graduation. So they have to satisfy that in one of 2 ways. They can either take my class or they can do Procertus certification. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but basically it's the Office Suite and Adobe Acrobat lessons. So in my class, what I try to do is not focus on how to use Word and Excel and all those things, although I do go over bait stamping and Acrobat and redaction and some more advanced tools, but also to introduce them to other platforms so they can get a certification in TextDocs practice management system and their document assembly program, in Disco's e-discovery certification program. They write a little code using a no-code platform called Q&A, and then they can also do the Procertus certification if they want to. So as I was teaching that class and developing that class, I started reading more and more about social media in the law and all the legal issues, from Section 230 to torts and privacy and everything else, right? Or attorney advertising, all of that kind of stuff. So I developed a social media in the law class separate from the law practice technology class. And then I was doing that research there and looking at content moderation and all of those kinds of things and the biases built into some systems. Then I decided to teach an AI in the law class. And this was just before I made the proposal, just before GPT 3.5 came out. So I proposed it in the spring of that class. And so it took me longer to develop because, I'm inundated with information every single day. And then to figure out what to teach in that class was kind of challenging, right? So what I decided to do is, I leaned on GPT-4 and Claude and other platforms to give me an idea, like if you were going to teach this class, what would what would you cover? And then I looked at other professors and what they're covering. But there are very few, honestly, there are very few AI in the law classes. There are some about using generative AI in legal writing or in legal research, but there are very few, broadly speaking, across law schools that focus on AI and the law and the legal issues surrounding it. There is luckily a group that was recently formed, AI and law professors, from April Dawson and Dan Lina. So we can share information with each other. But when I look at just the strictly AI in the law class, there are about 51 classes, and they vary about what they cover. So my goal is to not just introduce them to the different platforms and the limitations of platforms and prompt engineering and all of that stuff, but also to first start out with the legal duties that pertain to what the future of their practice is going to be. So the duty of competence and understanding how technology works and the risks and benefits associated with that. Stop me anytime if I'm just blah.
This makes my job as an interviewer so much easier. Please go on.
Okay. And also about confidentiality and communications with students and fairness to the tribunal. As we know, there have been various lawyers, not just Stephen Schwartz in the SDNY, but many others who have gotten into trouble by including in their filings hallucinated citations with hallucinated internal citations. I mean, quite bad. One who used an AI platform that he might have some financial interest in to write his closing argument. So we don't want our students to be those guys, right? We want our students to understand the risks and benefits of it and to really engage with the platform. So we can talk about later about faculty and how other faculty and how they feel about integrating generative AI into legal education. From my perspective, I want them to use it and I want them to become experts.
Yeah.
I've had some of my interns just become invaluable to their supervising attorneys at their placements because they know how to use these platforms. So,
And I guess I will step in here because I think that for the purposes of my audience, I mean, we don't care about that debate because
right,
the vast majority of us, we're attorneys, we're using it, and we're expecting, especially because we're not billing our time or we don't want to be, and so these tools take away billable hours. Period.
right.
And so it's not profitable for us to be billing time and using these tools, and so the faculty can think what the faculty are going to think, and that's up to them. Share this podcast episode with your faculty when we're all said and done, and
I
maybe they'll
absolutely
change their
will.
minds. Yeah.
Actually, I'm presenting to them on March 3rd, and I'm making these similar arguments. And one of them is, as we were talking about just before we started, about reasonableness of fees,
Hmm.
right? You can't just say, I'm not going to use it. It's too complicated. I think it's cheating or it's too much of a crutch and turn away from it and ban it from your classes as a violation of the honor code. I mean, I think that's a terrible disservice to the
Yeah.
students because they're going to need, not only are they going to need to know how to use it, but they're the ones that are going to be writing the regulations surrounding all of this, right? And they're the ones that are going to be influencing the professional duties that they have, right? So to deny it or to just turn away from it, I really think is a huge disadvantage to our students. And luckily, my students use it all the time.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you mentioned tech competence, right, being one of these legal ethical responsibilities that we have. Although, and I mean, you tell me you're the professor, so I might not have come across these particular ethical rules out there. I haven't read them all, but
Mhm.
there's a duty of competence, not a duty of use and competence, right? So you don't have to
Right.
use it. It's just if you do use it, you must use it competently. So I think there's a failure there of our profession, right? Because we don't have a duty to use it. There's this implied duty of efficiency, which maybe is a duty to use technology if it makes it more efficient, right? So I feel like have you come across like this requirement before, and how have you been teaching that?
Well, that kind of falls under the reasonableness of fees,
Right.
right? Because I teach the different duties that I teach have to do with not just competence, but I tell them that you have to inform your clients what technologies you're going to use, and in some cases, what you're not going to use. So, just thinking about e-discovery, for instance, right? You have this case with an enormous number of documents. It is not fair to your client to have junior associates sitting with, Mountain Dew or Monster or whatever it is that they drink now, and pizza and going through bankers' boxes, reviewing documents, right? You have to use the platforms that are available. Otherwise, you're overbilling your clients. And not only from a duty perspective, you're going to lose your clients because
Right.
you're going to be less efficient. And I'm writing this book on, I don't know whether I mentioned to you, I'm writing a book on AI and the practice of law in a nutshell. So anybody who went to law school probably knows about the Nutshell series from West Academic, right? So I'm writing one on that. And I'm starting out with what's become now axiomatic, which is you're not going to be replaced by AI. You're going to be replaced by a lawyer who knows how to use AI, right?
Hmm.
That used to be like novel and enlightening a year ago when I'd go to webinars. Now it's just, it's exactly right. So you have to build that in, but you also have to, clearly communicate with your clients what tools you're going to use or not going to use and why. Make sure that you cover confidentiality. Make sure that there's candor to the tribunal, right? That you're letting them know there are standing orders all around now. Brantley Starr in the Northern District of Texas was one of the first ones, or the first one, to put in a standing order where you have to certify that if you have used generative AI, that a human has reviewed it for accuracy. There's fairness to the opposing party. You got to make sure that the evidence is genuine and not a deep fake, right? All of the different things that relate to it. And then there's misconduct, right? You don't want to use an application that has any kind of bias or discrimination built into it. So there's all kind of duties that have to do with AI, not just generative AI, but AI generally before generative AI, right?
Hmm.
Prediction systems, extractive technology or extractive AI and all of that.
And it was Cecilia Zanitti, who is this duty of efficiency attorney who's also teaching lawyers. So to bring this part of the conversation in, she's launching a legal tech company. She's a former in-house attorney, and she's teaching through like Maven, which is this like cohort-based learning platform, to
Right.
prompt engineering and all and that type of those types of lessons about AI and how to use it. So it's like you did talk a little bit about some of the things that you're teaching, but ultimately, is that also some of what you're trying to impart onto your students? Is thinking about how to use these tools and actually practicing using them through prompt engineering or whatever version of it?
Yes, absolutely. So I introduced them last week. We spent 2 hours on just the different platforms and the advantages of some and the disadvantages of others. So, like we talked about Bard, for instance, that has a limited context window, but of course, I have to explain what a context window is, right? And I go through and explain what it is actually doing. That it's just predicting the next word. It's not analyzing. It's not, it doesn't know it's talking to a human being. It's an it. The one huge thing issue I have with these platforms is the anthropomorphization of them,
Hmm.
because it makes you trust them a little bit more if you think it's real human. Right? But anyway, we go through all how it became what it has become with compute and data and the transformer model. And then we go through the different platforms. So I talk about, Bard has a narrow context window, but it has access to the live web to verify, right? So that's a
Right.
huge advantage. Claude has an enormous context window. So if you want to upload a bunch of documents, if you want to upload a case, for instance, the author copyright case in the Northern District of California, it's one of them is 153 pages. I tell my students, I don't want you to read this, right, for this class. I want you to upload this into Claude and ask Claude to read it for you and to summarize. And I want you to figure out these things from the complaint, right? Because I'm going to ask you, just like cold calling, if you had read the case, I'm going to ask you these questions. So it's an iterative process, right? It may not give you the right information at first. So I want you to drill down and learn how to extract all of the information that you can from it. And then, of course, there's GPT 3.5 and GPT-4, and I talk about the advantages of the paid versions and how relatively cheap it is. And then it can be used for everything from, you have limited ingredients in your refrigerator, want to figure out what to cook for dinner, or you want to write a children's book, if you want to create images, or in the context of law, that it has a nice sized window, context window, but it also now has the store. So For academics, there's Scholar. There's a bunch of different specialized LLMs that you can have access to on there. So that to me has Claude was my favorite until the store was released, and now I bounce back and forth between the two.
Yeah.
So,
I
and then I teach them about role, right? We go through like a general analyze this, or not analyze, summarize this document, right? And then we go through and say, okay, now we're going to get more specific. We're going to tell it what role it has. It's a prosecutor, it's a law professor, it's an associate, right? What the task is to summarize, to analyze, to, you know, draft questions, however, format. Do you want it in bullet points? Do you want it in paragraphs? How many paragraphs do you want, right? The tone, right? Do you want it to be professional? Do you want it to be sarcastic? Do you want it to be friendly? I walk through how to reply to emails that you might have got from the other side. And you want to be assertive, but you don't want to be like fear mongering either, right? You want to be nice and professional, but assertive at the same time. And look at the different outputs that you get from putting in different tones. The objective, right? This is for my boss. Tell it how important it is. Tell it to go step by step. Tell it to take a breath. Tell it that you're going to give it, a $10 tip at the end. All of that kind of helps with the parameter and the temperature of the prompt, right? And then any restrictions. What do you want to withhold from it? What don't you want it to talk about? What language do you not want it to include, and all of that kind of stuff. And we play around and through an iterative process, look at the different responses based on how you specify those particular parameters.
Mhm, mhm. And are they using at all like Bing AI because it uses GPT-4 even though it doesn't have the multimodal features, or are you not really having them use Bing right now?
I'm not having them use Bing right now. I'm having
Okay.
them stick to, creating accounts and using the platform. I do introduce them to, so I've had this little browser extension in Chrome called Cider that I've been using for quite a long time. There's an attorney in Michigan called Enrico Schaefer, and he has a lot of stuff up about prompt engineering for lawyers and different videos that he's produced. And he's the one that told me about Cider. So I've been using that. It's a nice little app. But now also I'm using, I have ChatGPT running on the side. I have Google's extension running on the side. So I've got all kinds of different things that appear in my my search that help summarize some of the context or some of the answers that I'm looking for.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and there are so many tools, but I mean, you've highlighted all the big ones. I mean, I've tried to play around with Bing AI. I think it is my least favorite out of all the tools. So it's probably wise that you're not
Yeah.
having your students use it. I mean, I've used Bard, ChatGPT, both versions. I use Claude primarily for this podcast because
Right.
these are long transcripts. I mean, incredibly
Exactly.
long,
Yeah.
and Chat, so so the large context window just makes it really easy to, to summarize these things. Although I will tell you, I still think ChatGPT is a better writer. And so I'll take the summaries and I'll tell ChatGPT to improve it.
I do the same thing sometimes, depending on if I'm drafting something, I'll put it through both. And then sometimes I like some parts of one and some parts of another. So I
Well,
use it.
I'm so interested though, because also your students are doing it, and so you're getting like because of your position, you're seeing all these different kinds of outputs and inputs. I imagine you're also looking at the inputs. So
Mhm.
I'm curious to know like being in the position that you're in, like what have you seen? Is it really this hybrid approach that yields the best results of not just leaning in on one LLM, or have you seen students maybe, or in your own experience, that you've like, I'm all in on Claude and I know how to maximize my usage of Claude, for example, that I'm getting better results there. Like what have you seen?
Well, so last semester, because of the large context window of Claude, I told my students, I introduced them to all of them, but I told them, depending on what you're doing. So some of my students are interning, right? In law firms. And so I said, depending on what it is that you're doing, if you would need to summarize a deposition, right? Or you need to draft deposition questions, Claude is your best bet because it has such a large context window. And even if you have to break the deposition into parts in order to fit into the context window, it's much better than using the other platforms, right? And, one of my students used to come in every week and tell me how he just blown away his supervising attorney
Mhm.
because the attorney was using a particular was starting a case that was a legal issue he hadn't really encountered before. It had to do with food. I can't remember exactly the specifics. And he said, "Kate, you go out and see whether you can create any depositions questions for this," expecting it to take like a week or so. And 20 minutes later, he was back in the office showing him. Now, the lawyer is going to get rid of some of those questions, but it's not starting from an empty sheet of paper, which, quite honestly, that's not how any lawyer starts, right? They're either using a form or a complaint that they drafted before, et cetera, right? So nobody starts with a blank sheet of paper. So the concerns that some of my faculty have about it being cheating, I think is really not an accurate way of thinking about all of this. But last semester and this semester, I did a survey before the beginning of class, before classes even started, asking them, what platforms have you used? What do you use it for? Would you consider yourself an expert, a novice, and anything in between? And 100% of my students had only used, if they used a platform, it was actually only 73% of them had tried using a platform and they had only used ChatGPT 3.5. And none of them had a subscription. And they were only using it for text generation. There was one person who used Midjourney for an image, for a generative image, and they all classified themselves as either novice or basic users. Not one of them had advanced skills. And when I asked how often they used them, it was, once a month, maybe once a week. Very few of them, I think it's 10% used it once a week. Nobody every day, certainly. And a lot of them had never used any of them. So as far as seeing how their prompts develop over the course of the semester, that's one thing I'm paying particular attention to now, because I have focused so much on the strengths and weaknesses of each platform.
Right.
Right. So, and then Lexis has its Lexis Plus AI, Westlaw has its AI. There's Case Text and CoCounsel and Harvey and Paxton and on and on and on with the legal ones.
Yeah. And at least from my experience using some of the company's AIs, I actually find that they also have a lot of limitations.
Yeah.
I have been a big user of Paxton, and actually in a couple of weeks of us recording, their episode will go live on this podcast. And I have not had any issues with context window problems uploading 600 something page documents and being able to query it on there. So, and they're also not coming at it from like being attorneys in the profession, but just working very closely with attorneys to try to develop this product. So I wonder if like that's an advantage of lacking the functional fixedness of the legal profession when building that tool. So you mentioned some of these tools, and there's more. I mean, right, like Parrot comes to mind. There's Speed Legal, Even Up. I mean, Clearbrief, Hyperdraft. There's all these tools that are either using some version.
Spellbook is a quite good one. Yeah,
absolutely. I should have said Spellbook. They've been on the podcast as well. VLEX has their Vincent AI tool.
VLEX, right?
Damien's been on the pod. So there's all these tools, and LawDroid, Tom Martin's product, LawDroid. He was very quick to the scene building that. And then there's tools even like Canva that have incorporated AI, and lawyers need to market their firm. So like they've got to kind of learn that AI too. So have you started to think about at least like how to incorporate these professional legal tools with teaching students? Or do you think it is still good foundationally to learn some of these free, large, non-specific models before moving into the legal specific ones? When I went solo, I pivoted from mostly litigation to a transactional-only practice. I did not have a database of documents to automate. That's why a business and employment legal document database and automation tool like 650 is super useful. I can rely on the quality of the documents in 650's database since they're putting excellent legal minds to work curating and updating their documents and automations over time. When you're not billing by the hour, outsourcing and efficiency matters, and 650 can help you scale your practice to get high-quality documents drafted in less time. Use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED at 650 gavel650.com and when being onboarded to get 10% off. If you're not a business and employment attorney or you have your own documents that you'd prefer to use, then my next sponsor, Gavel, is the automation tool for you. Gavel allows you to build shareable, client-facing workflow and document automations. In other words, Gavel helps you create a legal practice where attorneys can monetize the value they bring clients in productized form and scale via subscriptions and flat fees. Use the code LOSTSubscribed at gavel.io to get 10% off an annual subscription. There's no one right way to automate and scale your practice, but with one or both of my sponsors, 650 and Gavel, you can take your subscription law firm to the next level. Links to both in the show notes. Now back to the show.
So right now I'm just leaning on the general purpose ones. I introduce them and I show them the different legal apps, many of that you just described. I've had some presentations by the different companies, their reps coming in and walking the students through it. But I really want them, I think you can really hone your prompt engineering skills by using these general purpose ones. And also, I want them to be able to, most of them, you cut down on hallucinations. Well, you get rid of hallucinations if you provide it the content, right?
Right.
But I want them to understand that their clients may be using it and not using a particular legal app. I want them to understand what the risks are about accuracy, how to limit those risks, because the more that is in the general purpose apps that can go wrong, the better they become at prompt engineering and critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I introduced them to the other ones. There's one, Merlin, that's used for e-discovery. That's just fantastic. It can draft, witnesses for you. And it has the citation link right directly back. That's a great e-discovery product. So I introduced them to them all, but I don't require them to buy a textbook, but I do require them to buy one of the general purpose apps. And I think they'll also use it for their daily lives, which will make them use it more often. So for those reasons, I'm sticking to those for right now, but
Right.
that may change next semester.
Right. And because I know Paxson just went live with their pricing, and I think they have like a student pricing that's only $9 more a month than ChatGPT 4. Right.
Right.
And so it's one of those things where I mean, as an attorney who uses it almost every day in his practice, it is extremely more valuable than these non-specifically trained LLMs to our profession.
Right.
So
But they can also get
Oh,
Lexis and Westlaw for free.
oh yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So
I mean, absolutely. And I behooves those companies to make sure that they are, that they're letting those law students use their AI tools, which I
right.
sure hope they are. I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm outside of it. Another question I have for you is, because I will, like we said before in the pre-interview convo, I do talk to some classes of law students and usually around this topic or just starting a law firm in general, which now I can't not talk about AI. And I've gotten a surprising amount of pushback. So it's interesting to hear that, these students that are coming in, even though they sign up for the class, like haven't been using it or aren't using it because, and they're thinking like, oh, I just made this massive investment or I'm starting to make this massive investment in my future. And now like these tools are just going to do everything. But what I've tried to tell them, I'm curious your perspective on this as well, is right now I could use one of these legal AIs like I would use an associate. And they are at the level of easily a fifth-year associate. So I don't need to hire an attorney right away as a true solo. Like I could leverage this tool for much longer and stay solo. But they shouldn't be scared because that means if they learn how to use the tool, of course, I'm just telling them this and then leaving because I'm a guest speaker.
Right.
If they could learn to use the tool and they exit law school, they're at the equivalent of a 5-year associate. So their value, right?
Right.
It has significantly increased in what they could do for that law firm, assuming that law firm is not billing their time.
Right. Exactly. That's what I tell them. I mean, don't shy away from this. I have one student in my class I was just talking to before the start of class last week, and he said he hates technology just generally. So I said, so why are you taking the class? I'm curious. And he said, well, I think I should be aware of it. And I said, yes, you absolutely should be aware of it. And it probably fit in his schedule as well.
Yeah.
Replace it. Right? But you need to know how to use it because even if you try to just say that you're not going to use it, you're going to be the lawyer who does everything manually and it's not realistic. You're not going to do that because like I said before, No lawyer starts with a blank page, right? You're either using a form or you're using somebody else's document or you're using a pleading that you wrote before, right? And you're repurposing it. So this is not really very different from that, although it does it much better and much faster,
Right.
right? And there's less, I tell my students all the time, if they use an old complaint that they wrote, there's a likelihood that they're going to screw up if they don't make sure that they've gone through and absolutely verified that the pronouns have been changed, that everything has been changed in it, right? And here you're really not going to have that problem. You could even upload that complaint and say draft it for something else and make sure that all the pronouns are changed in the platform, right? So it doesn't make any sense to me, it doesn't make any sense to me either that faculty are so afraid of it. Many faculty are so afraid of it. So the class that I'm going to show them, what I'm going to teach them is not only is it great for the legal profession, but it's also great for you because you can upload your content from your PowerPoint slides and say, draft 5 multiple choice questions for your law class, provide the rationale and the right answer, et cetera. And then now you've got 5 to choose from. You may not like
Right.
all of them, but it's going to make your life so much easier.
Right. And it gets you going. And
Yeah.
even for the staunch detractors, I'd say, fine, do it yourself, draft it yourself from scratch, which you're not really doing. You're looking at last year's, test or whatever.
Right.
Or in the case of the attorney, you're looking at a previous motion that you filed.
Mhm.
So draft it from scratch, your version of scratch, then put it in the AI and just say, make it better or
Right.
change all passive voice to active voice, right?
Right.
Like do little things and you'll still be amazed that the product is going to be so much better than what you would have submitted or you would have filed or given to a client or sent that email or whatever it is. You could still start from scratch and then make it better using AI. Have you been
Right.
seeing this?
Yes. So I just converted one, I'm going one by one, but I just converted one of our legal professors into changing one of her group exercises. So I use a team-based learning approach that leverages AI.
Mhm.
She's doing these group, which everybody's familiar with when they went to law school. Okay, break into a group and draft a complaint, right? Or write a policy, whatever it is. And so she has them do that. And she said, so I wanted to figure out like maybe I should talk to them about AI. And I said, why don't you have the AI do the exercise and let your students analyze the output? What's missing, right? Did it stimulate another idea that you might want to include? Like have the AI do the labor and have your students do the critical thinking. So she's switching. She's completely switching over. And then she's going to also have them draft things and upload it for improvement purposes. So that's one convert. One by one, I'm kind of moving them over.
I
Um,
and, I think it's evidence, though, if you could convince one person, I think it's evidence that you can convince anybody, and some of it is just them getting their hands on the tools and
right.
playing around with it and just seeing how it increases their efficiency and the quality of their output. I heard an example recently that I've really liked. I've given some very bad analogies, trying to come up with a good one, but I like this analogy better. It's not mine, though I forgot who I got it from. But it's like trying to use Gen AI like the way those lawyers who got in trouble were using
Yeah.
it was
Mhm.
like trying to hammer a nail with a screwdriver. It's just the wrong tool. Is it a
Right.
tool that you could use to do construction and to do certain things like in the same area as hammering a nail? Yeah, sure. But it's not the tool to hammer a nail. And so you're not going to get good results. So use the tool the way it was meant to be used or that it's designed to be used. And ChatGPT is not a legal research tool. So you
Right.
can't rely on it
Exactly.
that way.
Exactly right. So I
Right.
do this one exercise with them about exactly that, where I got this one from one of the librarians actually, about premises liability, talk about the difference between a licensee and an invitee, explain to me the differences and cite some cases. And so it does that and it looks phenomenal, right? And then I'm like, okay, let's check the citations. And most of them are wrong,
Mhm.
right? But if you do the same thing in Bard will actually, because you can use the Google button, right, to go
Right.
verify. It will give you, it's not perfect, it's not 100%, but it will at least help you winnow down what cases are probably right. Right? So because it has access to the live web, which is another thing we talk about, like which no platforms, none of these like Claude and Bard. We don't really know. I mean, I think GPT-4 is saying that its most recent update was March of 2023.
Right.
Claude early 2023, don't know exactly when. So I try to stress to them that, from then on, they don't know anything about the world, right? So, but
Yes.
Bard, at least you have access to the live web. So that may be an advantage in some cases. And
And
then
I'm
we
still
do it.
not, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, I'm still not, to stay on point just a little bit, I'm not looking at these as a source of truth, period.
Right,
In the same way that just because I Google something and get someone's blog
right,
doesn't mean it's gonna be accurate, right? I Google some legal, because this is what, lay people do. They'll Google some legal situation they're in. They'll get to some lawyer's blog, and it's not even in their jurisdiction, first of all. So they don't even know, right? Like, but then we, the lawyer, like
right,
sometimes, like I don't do litigation anymore, and the law that I do practice is typically very well settled. But back when I was doing litigation, I had to research an issue. I would Google it, see what attorney has written about it, and then actually like look up the cases or the statutes that they're referencing, because that's what I know how to do. I'm not just
right,
looking to Google, getting the answer and relying on it. So why would I ever treat generative AI as a source of truth in the same way? I wouldn't. So I don't think anybody should. I think restricting its source of truth, like you mentioned earlier, or retrieval augmented generation, as I've learned that it's called in the AI space,
mhm,
that's an important tool. But also, like it's like having somebody either for $20 a month or for free who has like multiple masters in English and writing
right,
that is on your team. Like, I'm not going to go to them to discover an answer to a question. I'm going to go to them to improve my writing or help me come up and brainstorm ideas. Like, those are the two main ways I'm going to use that person. And so I think that, like, at least for me, the way I use it and the way I try to explain to others how they should use it too, like, that's the main way to use it. When it comes to a source of truth and trying to find information, I mean, extra grain of salt. Like what I like about Bard is I could ask Bard about me. Like in my practice, that's only been around for 2 years when I went solo.
right.
And so Bard has access to Google, and so it's going to come up with stuff. And frankly, it's not all right, but like 80 to 90% of it is right. And it sometimes like really good marketing material that I could use for my firm, just like asking it about me. ChatGPT and Claude, they can't do that for me, but
Right.
Bard can. I'm still not gonna. But it's a great example also for the attorneys listening. Because I don't think I've talked about this before. Like if that's the future of search, which maybe it is, I don't know. If people ask these platforms about you, it's going to say something and it might not be accurate.
I
So,
did that in my class. So I said, everybody's Googled yourself, right? Tell me
yeah,
about it. And I'm all over the web because they've been all over the web for 20 plus years, right? So, but I asked the platforms, I asked Claude, and I think I asked GPT-4, who is Korin Munsterman? Right. And it said, don't know, and didn't know anything, but it did give some kind of answer. And it gave something like, my date is not current, blah, 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 blah. But I put it in one of the platforms and it replied in Dutch. So, and the reason I think is because my last name, my grandfather is from Holland, his, going back years and years. So, and my first name is a Swedish name. So I think that's why I just decided to respond in Dutch. Oh, but it's just predicting the next word. It's not
right,
relying on any information in
right,
order to give me these answers, right?
right,
So I thought that was an interesting exercise. I say the same thing to my students. These are not a source of truth, right? These are guidance. These are to get you started. And then if you want to do legal research, use the legal research tools. Do not use these. These are general purpose, but you'll become better at the specific research tools, which I teach at the end of the semester. You'll become better at those because you've learned how to do. It's like when I used to tell people I learned how to ski in Vermont and it was all icy and all of that kind of stuff. So when I go to Colorado, it's a breeze. But if you learn how to teach in Colorado or ski in Colorado when you go to Vermont, you're going to slip all over the place, right? So start where it's more difficult and more challenging, and then it's much easier to use the other platforms.
yeah.
That makes sense.
Even if you have to find the case in the way you normally find the case through using
Right.
Lexis or Westlaw, and then put that case into Claude and say, hey, summarize the facts for me, right? Or
Right.
summarize this case into 2 paragraphs, right? Like
Exactly.
that's still going to save so much time. You should still read cases because it's good foundational knowledge and
Sure.
understanding when you're in school. But I feel like the lawyer, the busy attorney, is gonna try to get summaries for cases, or, ask it specifically about looking for what you're looking for in that case, what you think it said based on the synopsis in the AI or in the legal research tools, right? So
Right.
you could do a combination of traditional legal research using AI, and it doesn't have to be that different from what it looks like, right? What it looked like 2 years ago.
Right, exactly. And I try to stress to them it's iterative, right?
Hmm.
You don't just accept the first answer. You can find something that you think might be particularly on point for your issue, highlight that, copy it, tell me more about this, right? And it will give you more and more information.
Well, just like I was afraid of, we are starting to get low on time. So before we start to wrap up the interview here, another thing we chatted about pre-interview was the implications that generative AI and AI has on how lawyers make money. So, what are some of your thoughts around that? And you did say you were in private practice for a short stint. So, like, was that like, did you, or did
No,
you ever
no,
have?
I consulted with law firms. I never
Okay,
actually practiced law, but
then
I
consulting did
worked.
like. Have you ever had to bill your time? Is ultimately what my question was going to be.
Well, I did. When before I went to law school, I worked as a paralegal for a while. So I did have to bill my time then. And then I was a law librarian after I got my MLS. And I had to bill my time for that too. And now I have students billing their time for research that they're doing for me. So I'm always watching how much they're doing and how efficient they are. So I see it from different sides. I think your idea about a subscription service, because I teach in my law practice technology class, as I mentioned to you earlier, I teach one on the latent legal market and how many people in this country don't have access to lawyers for things that could be, critical to their lives, like custody issues and divorce and all other kinds of issues, writing a will, everything, right? And there's legal Zoom, I suppose some people can rely on for some issues, but I think this idea that you have of a subscription service where people can, just like any other subscription, buy access to legal services at a substantially reduced fee than a retainer, right? It's just brilliant idea, which I cannot wait to listen to some of your other episodes on this and how you actually deploy that. But I'm going to tell my students about that. I'm going to tell the professors when I do the faculty presentation on the third. I'm going to tell them about it too, because I think it could open up the doors to so many people.
Yeah. And
It's
and
just
and
amazing.
I can tell you right now that I've interviewed enough lawyers on the podcast who also use the model. I mean, there are dozens of us, if not maybe even close to 100, because I know for a fact the podcast has inspired more lawyers to start to do it. Uh, but the biggest advantage of the subscription model is also the hardest gap to cross when it comes to serving latent legal market clients, which is the existing knowledge around hiring a lawyer is they're expensive, and so I'm only going to hire one when I have no other choice but to. So like when
Right.
that custody issue becomes a real big problem. The largest benefit of the subscription model is for a very low cost, we can help you avoid that from ever becoming a big expensive problem. Imagine if you had a plumber on subscription who came once a month to check all your pipes.
I know. Wouldn't that be
And
fantastic?
then you never get a burst pipe, or if you do, maybe there's a significant discount because they were supposed to prevent that sort of thing from happening, right? So it's the same kind of thing with subscription legal services. It's preventive legal. Yes, things will happen and you're subscribed, and that's a good thing. And so it will help avoid, you got this severance agreement that you never thought you were going to get, right? So like let's handle that when that sort of thing arrives. Or you could talk to a lawyer who you're already paying every month when some weird things are happening at work, and maybe we could avoid that severance situation, entirely, right? So like that is, that's sort of the biggest benefit. And so I'd give that back to the professors of law to try to solve that problem because it is a kind of a marketing problem. It's an education gap
Right.
of but there's I think if more law students even are thinking about that, or law professors are writing about how do you solve that problem. I think for us subscription attorneys out there, that is a big problem. And even like doctors, I know there's an attorney, Matthew Stevens, of Provider Legal. He serves small doctor offices on subscription. I mean, they're paying a lot more than like what my clients are paying. But even them, like they're doctors, and they have a hard time like figuring out. So it's not unique to just the latent legal market. It's also, even highly educated people. They don't think of legal avoidance or legal problem avoidance
Right.
as a thing that they need. And even like access to justice implies we wait until
Right.
people need justice. How about we avoid them even needing access to justice in the first place? And I think there's not enough being written or said about that. So I'll throw that back to you to bring
Well, you
to,
just
to
gave me
the
an
legal
idea,
educators.
actually. I agree with you. And you just gave me an idea. So I am on a committee for the Dallas Bar Association. We're having a symposium on AI and the law in October. I think it's going to be October 23rd. And I'm going to propose. So we have our agenda fairly well written, but we don't have anything about what you're talking about.
Mhm.
So I'm going to propose to my fellow committee members in the chair that we talk about this somewhere in the program, that we have something about that. So I may be knocking on your proverbial door to see whether we can get you to speak or
Let me
others
know.
like you.
Happy to volunteer. I don't know if I could fly out there because I have my own practice and a 3-year-old, and I don't want to leave
Right.
my
Oh,
wife hanging, who also works full time. So flying out, going in person places, it's tough for me right now at this stage of my life. But
yeah.
I'm always happy to recommend speakers and find some people local too. So
Oh, that would be
um,
great. That would
yeah,
be
some
great.
sort of collaboration. I think I'm very open to finding a way to make that work. Well, with that, Corinne, I just want to ask you the last question I ask all my guests, which is a hot dog a sandwich and why?
I just saw something on this the other day. I think it was one of our faculty candidates. So sorry, but I just saw it. And so it depends on what the rules are, what the definitions are, right? It's bread, it's meat.
Spoken like a law professor.
I know. So it all depends.
Well, okay, well, we've definitely
It's
got
a
version.
great law professor answer. It depends.
Okay, and I'll grant you that caveat. What is your instinct on the answer to that question?
My instinct is no.
Why?
The shape, I think. But then subs are shaped the same way. So I don't know. I will take it back. Yes. I'm gonna say hot dog is a sandwich.
Okay, okay. There you go. Well, with that, if anyone wanted to find you or follow up with you, I know we got connected on LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else for people to follow up if they wanted to reach out?
Obvious at the law school, so the law
Mhm.
school's website, but LinkedIn is really the best way. It's really the only social media platform that I use. I lurk on X/Twitter, and I'm only on Facebook because my husband forces me, but otherwise I'm not on that. So I teach, just so you know, I teach social media in the law, and I don't like the platforms, but I am on LinkedIn. It's a professional necessity. So
Got it. Korin Munsterman, thank you so much for coming on Law Subscribed.
thank you. This was so much fun. The time just flew. Thank you.
And that's our show. Thanks again to 650 and Gavel for being sponsors. The best way for others to discover this show is for you to share it with somebody you think would find value from it. Follow me on LinkedIn, since that's where I'm most active on social media, and click the bell towards the top right of my profile to get notified about all of my posts about this podcast and everything else I think is valuable for you to see. To get in touch, message me on LinkedIn or email kurbis@lawsubscribed.com. All links are in the show notes. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.